All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going on a bit of a journey. We are looking right past the folklore, right past those pristine oil paintings you see in museums to uncover the messy, brilliant, and honestly, deeply human realities of America's founding fathers. We're talking Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson. We'll be looking into their actual leadership decisions, their very real flaws, and how the political norms they lived by differ wildly from what we see today.
It's a pretty crazy thought, isn't it? Could the Founding Fathers actually survive a modern election? Well, to really answer that, we first have to shatter those flawless marble statues we built of them in our minds. We have to look at the real, imperfect men who sat in those sweltering rooms in Philadelphia to design the whole American experiment. So let's dive into this and meet the real humans behind the history.
Section 1. Founders. Men, not myths.
You know, history textbooks often paint these men as these pristine, almost mythological angels. But these men were incredibly complex, flawed human beings. And honestly, when we elevate them to gods, we completely miss out on the practical, pragmatic lessons of how they managed to build a nation despite their flaws. Look at the contrast. On one hand, we have this flawless folklore, like that classic story of a young George Washington proudly declaring, "I cannot tell a lie," after chopping down a cherry tree. But on the other hand, the messy human reality is starkly different. The truth is, these men were brilliant self-promoters, like Franklin, who was in a common-law marriage. And, jarringly, men like Washington and Jefferson were slaveholders. They were imperfect people designing a representative system meant to be run by, well, imperfect humans.
Moving on to Section 2. Franklin, the relentless innovator.
Let's pivot over to our first founder, Benjamin Franklin. You could easily frame him as America's very first true entrepreneur and showman. What's absolutely incredible about Franklin is that he worked tirelessly to improve society well into his 80s, and he did the whole thing without ever once running for president. His resume is just wild. He didn't just run a print shop. He created what was essentially the first American franchise, setting up shops all up and down the colonies. When he was a teenager, he desperately wanted to write for his brother's paper, so he literally slipped letters under the door using the fake name Silence Dogood, pretending to be a 16-year-old widow. He published Poor Richard's Almanac, invented bifocals, and even came up with a musical instrument called the glass harmonica, which was basically different-sized water bowls on a spinning spindle. Oh, and he also founded the Junto, which was kind of like a mastermind group of local businessmen who just wanted to improve their society.
Here's a great story about him. While working in a pretty filthy London print shop early in his career, Franklin noticed his co-workers were super sluggish from drinking beer all day long. Now, they did this because the city water was totally full of disease. So Franklin's solution, he simply boiled his water to purify it. By drinking clean water instead of alcohol, he literally ran circles around his coworkers and became the absolute most productive printer in the whole shop.
Franklin also masterfully leveraged his incredible wit and his personal brand. When he was sent over to France to secure vital military support, he intentionally wore a raccoon fur hat, which, by the way, is something he'd never actually wear back home. He just wanted to play up that rustic American brand because he knew the French would absolutely eat it up. He knew exactly how to build consensus among these deeply divided colonies that normally only cared about their own borders. He famously summed it up by saying, "We must all hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately."
Which brings us to Section 3, Washington, the quiet leader. So, transitioning from the ultimate showman, we move over to George Washington. Now, Washington was this striking 6-foot-tall figure in an era where that was exceptionally tall. But here's the thing. He didn't lead with a loud voice. He didn't bang his fists on the table. He led through quiet consensus and his calculated physical presence in rooms that were just packed with type A alpha males. Let's look at his strategic rise. Step 1. He literally shows up to the Continental Congress wearing his old military uniform from the French and Indian War. He barely says a word, but it was this brilliant visual lobby for the job of commanding the new army. Step 2. He actually gets the job. Step 3. Throughout the entire Revolutionary War, he is constantly lobbying an incredibly underfunded Congress just to get basic troop funds, pleading that his soldiers didn't even have shoes. And finally, Step 4. He builds so much universal respect that he's eventually unanimously elected as our very first president.
But this leads to what is arguably his most crucial and honestly shocking act: voluntarily stepping down. Up until this point in world history, a conquering general almost always crowned himself king. But in December 1783, in Annapolis, Maryland, Washington just voluntarily stepped down from military power. He handed it right back to the representatives of the people. Men in the room openly wept at the sheer significance of it. And then he did it again years later, walking away from the presidency after 2 terms, which set a massive precedent that lasted all the way until FDR. Next up is Section 4, Jefferson, philosopher and dealmaker. Unlike the super-charismatic Franklin or the physically imposing Washington, Thomas Jefferson was a painfully shy, deeply private philosopher and lawyer. Yet this quiet student of the Enlightenment became the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, and he founded the University of Virginia. He was a man of just staggering contrasts. On one hand, he was the ultimate dealmaker. He doubled the geographic size of the entire United States for literally pennies on the dollar through the Louisiana Purchase, all with just the stroke of a pen. But on the other hand, Jefferson was this relentless tinkerer. He literally invented an early form of a photocopier, or an auto pen. It was this device with a rod connecting 2 pens, so as he wrote a letter, the second pen created an exact duplicate on another piece of paper.
Politically, Jefferson fiercely advocated for a representative republic. He understood that a pure 51% majority rules democracy could very quickly strip away the individual rights of the 49%. The republic system was intentionally designed to protect a person's individual pursuit of happiness from being crushed by the absolute whims of the majority.
And this brings us to one of Jefferson's most famous and probably most frequently misunderstood concepts. When Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptists about the separation of church and state, he was clarifying that the government could not mandate a national, state-sanctioned religious denomination. He wasn't saying that religion or personal faith had to be scrubbed entirely from the public square or government halls. He just meant the state couldn't force one specific church upon its citizens.
Let's look at how that compares to today in Section 5, Religion in Modern Politics.
By looking at Jefferson's unorthodox views on faith, we can actually see how drastically modern politics have shifted. Seriously, ask yourself, would Thomas Jefferson be elected today? The historical data suggest he would really struggle. During the hotly contested election of 1800 against John Adams, Jefferson was brutally attacked by opponents. They urged Christians to vote against the essential atheist because he denied the divinity of Jesus. Yet somehow, in 1800, America still elected him president. Now, contrast that historical reality with modern times. Jefferson overcame accusations of atheism to win the highest office, but jump forward to the 2016 election. Hillary Clinton is out campaigning, she walks into a South Carolina bakery, sees a customer reading a Bible, and she actively secures his support by having a conversation about that passage with him. That customer, who happened to be a Baptist minister, later talked about how absolutely vital it was to him to know his president had religious beliefs. This dramatic shift is perfectly captured by this quote from a Boston University article. It notes that today, it's almost impossible to win the presidency without some show of serious religious commitment. It's a really fascinating paradox, right? Because as the broader American population has actually grown more secular over time, presidential candidates are, paradoxically, required to be much more vocal and open about their personal faith to even have a shot at the office. We can track this evolution pretty clearly on a timeline. Back in the 1960s, John F. Kennedy actually had to downplay his Catholicism just to ease public fears. But by the time we hit the 1980s, the religious right had surged as this major political force. Fast forward to the 2000s and 2010s, and candidates from across the political spectrum, we're talking everyone from Barack Obama to Mitt Romney, faced intense religious vetting and scrutiny from the public. We've completely flipped the script since Jefferson's era. Wrapping things up with Section 6. Lessons for today.
Okay, so we've looked at the myths, the messy realities, and these shifting political norms. So what do we actually do with this? Well, here is the Founder's Playbook distilled down. From Franklin, the lesson is clear: never stop innovating. Keep creating and serving your community, whether you're 16 or 86 years old. From Washington, we learned that true power isn't about being the loudest guy in the room. It's about leading through quiet consensus and having the wisdom to know exactly when to voluntarily step back. And from Jefferson, the big takeaway is insatiable curiosity. Always be a student. Study other cultures, different philosophies, and opposing viewpoints so you can build something better.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. When we look at the brilliant, deeply flawed, and highly pragmatic reality of the men who built this nation, and then we compare that to the flawless, zero-mistake perfection we so often demand of politicians today, are we asking too much of our leaders or too little of ourselves? Think on that for a bit. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.